So President Ramaphosa is there attending that summit despite an explosion that tore through a street in the city's historic Latin Quarter a few hours before the event kicked off. Let's find out more with our correspondent Ross Cullen in Paris. Ross, good evening to you and welcome. We'll start with this. What's the latest on that explosion? We understand the building damaged was a design school that was popular with foreign students.
Yeah, that's correct. Good evening, everybody. That was in the south of the centre of the city at around about early evening time on Wednesday, understood to be a gas explosion. More than 30 people were injured in the house collapse and then the subsequent fire, which was brought under control by the fire service. There was a hunt for missing people as well. One of those people missing was actually found to be in hospital being treated. That was in the Latin Quarter, as you mentioned, which is an area with lots of students, lots of universities and schools and academies, as you say, in that part of town. And it would have been busy anyway with students, but also with lots of tourists at this time of year.
So the two-day summit ends tomorrow. It's being attended by about 40 heads of state, which didn't seem to deter them from coming to the city. The theme for this gathering is towards more commitments to meet the 2030 agenda. And they're talking about focused financing projects. These are some of the initiatives that are on the table. Just share with us what's being discussed on that front.
Yeah, they are discussing all sorts of issues at this summit related to financing and better liquidity and improved fiscal space and more infrastructure and green growth. In fact, green growth was the specific roundtable which Cyril Ramaphosa attended earlier. He was one of the lead speakers alongside his Egyptian counterpart, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, also the president of the Republic of Congo, Denis Sassou Nguesso, and all three spoke at that about green growth and making sure that the push for countries to ensure that they tie their economic expansion to renewable energy, investment in green initiatives, investment in initiatives that bring down your CO2 emissions. Cyril Ramaphosa spoke during that. We heard a little bit of his soundbite in the introduction when the president said that he was focused on just transition, a fair transition for energy in the country, not making sure that you don't leave anybody behind, but also making sure that there is space for countries to be able to work on trying to wean themselves off a reliance on fossil fuels. The South African president was very honest, saying that 90% of South Africa's energy currently generated by fossil fuels, wants to have a clean future, but that's not something that can be achieved in just 24 hours. There does need to be space, or as the South African leader put it, flexibility for countries to be able to adapt their infrastructure and energy plans going forward.
So a number of African states are there. You mentioned some of them: Nigeria, Egypt, the DRC, you talked about, and Zambia. Notwithstanding green energy and the debate and the possibilities around green energy within the context of a just energy transition, what's in this for African nations?
Well, a just energy transition was actually the name of a communique that was released just about an hour ago that was it was released by the French presidency, but Senegal was putting their name to the top of that communique. And there is an expected bilateral between Macky Sall, the president, and the host president, Emmanuel Macron, on Friday. He has a long list of leaders that he is meeting, including William Ruto of Kenya. So there is a real focus on trying to ensure that countries from the global south, emerging economies, for example, in Latin America as well. We heard from the Colombian president. We know that there's a lot of African leaders there. We know there are also leaders from Asia, from small nations like East Timor, larger nations as well. The Indian finance minister is here, the Pakistani prime minister. And so there are people from all across the world making sure that those voices from emerging economies can be put to Western leaders like Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, Emmanuel Macron, the French president as well, to try to ensure that what is in it for countries is that there is security, that there are jobs, that there is employment, and that there is a new model of financial architecture to try to improve the financing for these countries that are members of the global south.
Yeah, this subject of financing vis-a-vis the IMF and the World Bank, we discussed earlier in the program, certainly under focus and critiqued by many, including the UN Secretary General. But Ross, you'll keep us updated on developments where you are as the summit continues into tomorrow. Our SABC correspondent, Ross Cullen.